If you don't want to go to college, then do something as good or better. And if you can't, then go to college. Don't sit around and do nothing. That's a very big mistake. It's possible that college isn't for you. I mean, there's other things you can do that are productive. If you're a high school student and you're wondering if college is for you, one of the things I would recommend is choose as an alternative something equally or more difficult. And I would say to all of you, if you're ever facing a decision in your life, this is kind of a good rule of thumb, because you always have to ask yourself, is this not right for me, or am I just useless and lazy? It's good to keep yourself in check. And so maybe you're not doing very well in your job, and you think, well, I should either do a better job at my job, or maybe I should find a new job. And it's hard to do better at your job. And so then you might wonder if your decision to find a new job is just an escape. But if the rule is you'll only escape to something equally or more difficult or more challenging, let's say, then you kind of check yourself against your own temptation. If you're a high school kid and you don't want to go to college because you don't think it's for you, fair enough. Do you have a better plan? And if the answer is no, well, that's not a very good plan. It's college or nothing. Well, go to college then, because nothing is a really bad plan. And so if you don't want to go to college, you should do something else. And there's lots of other things to do. You can go to trade school, or you could go to a tech boot camp, or you could go into the military, or you could go get a job, or you could pursue something creative, or you could generate an enterprise, or you could do volunteer work. It's like you want to have a vision that justifies your decision not to go to college. And you could try college for a year or a semester and see how it goes. And then I would also say, even though I am somewhat and justifiably cynical about institutes of higher education, when I went to college and university, particularly university, because the college I went to, which was a small college, was a very good college, and most of the professors there really wanted to teach, and I learned a lot there. But at university, it was much more hit and miss. A fairly high proportion of the classes were abysmally bad. They were taught by people who had no business whatsoever teaching anything to anyone, even though they might have been credible researchers. They were terrible communicators. And that was at least one class out of 4. And then another, at least 1 out of 4, wasn't good for other reasons. So even when the universities weren't corrupted to the degree they are now, if you wanted to go to university and get a good education, that was sort of on you. You had to pick and choose between the professors. You had to use your head to find the elements of value. And I think that in most educational institutions you can still do that, although it's not the case that you can do that at all of them. And it's increasingly less likely that that's the case in the humanities, I would say. But I'm not so cynical that I believe it's impossible to go to the typical higher education institute and be careful and learn. Because there's always the library too, and the library is full of books, and books are written by great people, and you can go read the books written by great people, which is what you should be doing when you go to college anyways, or going to university. And the other advantage to going to college is that you buy an identity. You can say to people when they say, well, what are you doing? Which is sort of like saying, who are you? You can say, I'm a student. And that gives you an identity. And student means I'm someone who's made the sacrifices necessary to allow myself the freedom to determine who I want to be through a period of study extending over about 4 years. I don't think there's any difference, by the way, between prayer and thought. I think that thought is secularized prayer. I think that's even true, like evolutionarily and historically. And then the question is, well, what is prayer? And by implication, thought. And that is the opening up of yourself to revelation, and then the critical analysis of the revelation. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, when you think, you admit your ignorance, and you note that you have a problem, and you formalize the problem, which is to ask the question associated with the problem, and then you open yourself up for receipt of an answer. Well, how would have I liked my father to have conducted himself? And How did fathers that I knew that I admired conduct themselves? And how did great men in history who would be models for fathers conduct themselves? And what is the eternal spirit of the redeeming father? Those are all the same question at different levels of depth. And if you ask yourself that question, you'll stumble towards a revelation of the answer. And then it's incumbent on you to embody that, to act it out. You could ask a different question. What stupid things am I doing that I could stop doing, that I would stop doing, that are interfering with me being that? What stupid thing am I doing that I could quit doing, that I would quit doing? But there might be something on the edge there where, weak and useless as you are, you could stop that. Who knows what would happen if you really got your act together? You know, like there is this weird idea that's central to our culture that because we're all of divine value, that we have the spark of God himself within us, but we don't allow that to make itself manifest because we lack the courage and the faith. Your kids want to have the best relationship with you that they possibly could have. Like they're 100% on board with that idea. Way more than anyone you've ever met in your life. And that means you could have the best relationship with your children that you've ever had with anyone. That's what they offer you. And it's up to you to realize that, and you could. That's a good opportunity, man. Even if you've been beat around a lot and betrayed and hurt, you've got those little kids and they're thinking, what do you want to do, Dad? You know, the thing about people that you don't really understand is that he said fundamentally we're ungrateful and we can curse. If you set up a utopia so that all people had to do was eat cakes and busy themselves with the continuation of the species, that after a surfeit of that, after enough of that, which would happen quite quickly, people would just go mad just to break things, just so something unexpected and remarkable could happen, and that we're not built for security and safety, but for something, well, let's call it adventure, something like adventure. That's a good thing to know, you know, because you don't want to suffer unduly. And you might think because of that, that really what you want is happiness. You know, happiness is a boat that's easily capsized and the waves are always there. And so if your philosophy is one of, say, impulsive happiness, then you're not prepared when all hell breaks loose. And all hell, it will absolutely 100% break through at some point in your life. It might be a lot of it, and for some of you, it's going to be damn near the whole thing. And so if what floats your boat is happiness, you're going to be capsized by the first decent wave. And so then you might ask yourself, you know, what do you have instead of happiness that might be even more reliable? And I do think that adventure is more reliable than happiness. And in the Old Testament story of Abraham, Abraham is presented as a late bloomer, to say the least. And he had a very rich father by nomadic standards, and he could just sit around in the tent all day. But, God appears to him and says, get out of your security, get out of your comfort, leave your family, leave your community, leave your nation, go out into the world. And it's very interesting. God is presented as the manifestation of the Spirit that calls even the too secure and pampered to adventure. But the promise is... The promise of adventure, and the implication is that if you have a sufficient adventure, then that cannot so much protect you from suffering, because perhaps that is impossible, but to justify it. Because you kind of know this in your own life. When you look at your life, you might look back on travails that you've undertaken. People don't regret what they did that didn't work. They regret what they didn't do that could have worked. They regret the chances they didn't take. And even if you do an evaluation of your biography, one of the things that you want to be able to say to yourself is something like, that was extraordinarily difficult, but it was worth it. You see the suffering in the world, you see the suffering of children, you see maybe your own children or your suffering, and you wonder, well, how can reality be constituted so that I can have faith in its essence when there is so much suffering? And one answer to that is something like, well, how much suffering do you want? And you might think, none. I don't think that's right. So you could say, at least you want to be pushed to your limit. And maybe you find the most exciting times in your life. In fact, you'll pay for this, you'll pay to have this experience, to be pushed to your limit, like not beyond it, or maybe even a bit beyond it, and maybe not so far beyond it that you crumble and break and things fall apart, but could you be pushed to your limit optimally if there wasn't the possibility of falling apart and breaking? How are you ever going to take something seriously if the consequences aren't actually serious? And there's something delightful about dancing on the edge. That's why Hawaiians believed that surfing was sacred, and it's because to surf you have to be on the edge, right? And the waves can come and take you out at any moment, but without the possibility of the waves rising to take you out, then you can't dance on the edge. And maybe that's exactly what you do. When your consciousness is optimized, then you're deeply engaged in life and everything seems alive and meaningful, and maybe that's the solution in some profound sense to the problem of suffering. It's that you optimize your interaction with chaos rather than being protected all the time from everything that could hurt you.